You shared a model called IAP. So let us know what that is and how that can help others who are looking to master the arts of communication.
Okay, so IAP stands for Intention, Action, Perception. You can find it in the book, Why Are We Fighting? Actionable Strategies for Effective Communication. Um, so the IAP model, it was born from my relationship with my husband. We've been together for 13 years now. And I think the easiest way to explain it is when I talk about like the argument that led to it all. Um, there was this day that I was really frustrated with him. I don't know, I cannot remember what the argument was about. But I left the room. My intention for that was to communicate to him that your ass better follow me to show me that you care. Right. So, with my action of leaving the room, the expectation was that you're going to follow me to show me that you care. He didn't follow me and it didn't go well. Uh, but then I kind of asked him, like, why did you not follow me? And he said, well, you left the room, you created space. When I saw that, I thought, what would I want if I had created space? I would have want her to respect it. Therefore, I, in respecting you, didn't follow you. That's like when I started realizing like there is a difference between what my intention is and how somebody perceives the only external factor, which is the action itself. Does that make sense?
It does, because you want to make sure that if you were in that person's situation, how would you want to be communicated to? Is that correct?
Yeah. And we often believe that all actions have a universal meaning, and it's, of course, the meaning that I attribute to it. Right. So let's say if I'm having an anxious moment and I walk out, the people around me may think that, oh, what did I do? And take it personally. Because that, what, how else am I going to take the fact that we were talking and then you just walked out? Right. What did I do wrong? Or and it's not until maybe we have a conversation later on that I allow you to know it had nothing to do with you. I was in a state of feeling overwhelmed. And in that moment, I needed a space to breathe, right? But that's usually not communicated. So our actions tend to get lost in translation because we don't communicate the intentions behind it.
That makes sense to me because if I look back on, let's say, some of my relationships, when I wanted to communicate because I'm a talker, and I think sometimes, I think we mentioned this last time, because of our training, we know that the communication is very important. I look at some people when they've started to walk away. I wonder then, in hindsight, is it because they're upset? Is it because they don't like what they're hearing? Or is it that they need time, or maybe a combination of the three? What do you think it could be then?
I We cannot know until we know, right? That's the beauty of this is we can make assumptions as to what it could be, but unless I legitimately ask, I won't necessarily know. That's why I love whenever either in a session with couples or even myself with my friends or when in the moment, sometimes we can't ask or we don't know how to or we're too flustered to be able to go through it. So in the moment, things are not going to go well, right? In the moment, my intentions or my reasons are opaque to you. Your intentions and your reasons are opaque to me. But if we're able to get to a place, maybe the next day, where we have that post conversation, and I understand where you are coming from, and you understand where I was coming from, is like we're allowing the windows to our mind to open up and to be transparent to each other. So now, like if you're saying in this case, there are three possible options. I don't know what they are, but if I'm able to ask you and then you tell me what it is, I will understand you better for next time that this happens.
Okay, I
Yeah.
like that because then it puts everyone in a situation that It's kind of funny in a way, right? Like you're trying to communicate, but you're not asking, which is in a sense, you're not really communicating,
Yeah.
right?
We tend to make a lot of assumptions, and I think it's very normal. Either worst case scenarios or that we did something, right? If you're looking at me in a different way, I'm thinking, oh my God, what did I do? If somebody's just like staring at you at a store, but they're actually staring past you, but you think that they're staring at you, and you're like, what is wrong with you? What, you know? And the person is just thinking about their day, right? But we cannot know what we don't know. And I think this is a big thing that I often say in this book is we cannot know what we don't know, but when we don't know, we act based on what we think we know, right? We fill in the blanks with our own narrative. The way that we, so there will be, see, this is not for the next book that I'm thinking about, but I like to call it like the mind's eye. So let's say that I have three data in front of me. One is that you walked away, right? Two is that before you walked away, I said something that led you to be quiet. And three is like we were having fun up to now. Those are the three things that we know. To make sense of all these three, now I make a full narration in my mind. I probably said something that you did not like, and so you walked away because you're mad at me, right? Because it makes sense. And now that we think that this narration is the correct one, we are likely going to act upon it based on that, as opposed to ask, is the filling the blanks that I'm doing correct or not? Right? Because it could just be when we talk to the other person and like open the the blinds to our mind that the other person can say, we were having a great time. Um, I got a ting on my phone and it triggered me to think about something and go somewhere totally different. And I just needed to walk out at that moment. And it had nothing to do with me. Does that make sense?
Yes, because then maybe it's like I'm going to assume you don't understand, so therefore I'm not going to communicate. Or on the other side, and I've seen this so many times, and maybe you've seen this, Patricia, where it's like, okay, you should know what's wrong. So I'm going to assume that you know. Like what is that maybe why so many people struggle because instead of communicating, they just assume and assume again?
Yeah. we I'm one of them, right? I think we all have assumptions, and those assumptions, they come from the way that we've interacted with the world, the way the world has interacted with us. If I come from a place where chores are something that it's just what you do, you don't get any like accolades for any thank yous because it's what you're supposed to be doing. And then I'm here with my partner, and when they do a chore, I am looking at you as well, but that's what you're supposed to be doing. But they didn't come from that. They came from a place where when you do something, you get gratitude. Now the two of them are going to have like an argument because in this space I'm telling you like, well, why should I thank you for something that you should be doing in the first place? Right? It's not the same this way around. So our assumptions are based on how we grew up, how we see the world, and we tend to believe that this is the way, and we impose it onto others without questioning that that is not always the way.
Then how can we resolve that to make sure that we're not doing that in our relationships?
Talking, I think being interested and curious, or and even understanding that me perceiving something one way does not mean that that's how you meant it. So one of the things like with my clients that I was talking about, and I think this was this week, um, they were having an argument where the one of the spouses said like, I felt this way, and the other one said, well, I didn't do this. And so in that conversation, I said, well, we got so much data because in spite of you not having done what your partner is expressing, she still is telling you that that's how she's feeling. So could we ask her, like, what is it that I did that has made you feel this way? Right? Because I may not have done what you said that I'm doing, but you felt it. And when we feel a certain way, we can't, it's impossible for me to say, don't feel it because it's there. So if we're able to ask, like, what has made you feel this way? What has made you feel unhappy, unloved, frustrated, angry? I may not agree that I've done it, but we can then identify what can we do differently. Does that make sense?
Yes, because then it puts the person in a situation where they're going to have explained. But then I wonder if, like, if I take you and I, and for those listening, we're not actually in a relationship. We're in a relationship separate from each other. Let me clarify that, right? Because we both have rings on our finger. But for those who are listening, what I would say is then, could it be that maybe I would be a little afraid to get the answer back from the person if I were to ask that question?
I mean, for sure. I believe so. Um, I'm gonna go to Gottman for a minute because one of the things in writing this book, I used Gottman and Chapman. So I'll give a quick for those who may not know who they are. So love, love, Dr. John Gottman, and his wife, Dr. Julie Gottman. I think she's a doctor as well. They essentially did a study where they observed couples, right, coming in and out of like their lab, like a kitchenette, let's say, and they will come in and out, and they would just observe their interactions. And through that observation, they identified some themes, and they have the masters and the disasters of couples, and that's how the 7 principles for making marriage work came into fruition. There is a great video, it's a 47-minute video called The Making Marriage Work, where Dr. Gottman talks about it. But he says that the first principle is us being each other's best friends, right? Within a couple. So he's specifically talking about couples, is being each other's best friends. And he has what he calls the love map. How well can we travel in the map of our loved ones? How well do we know each other? But what I really loved about his study and what he expresses is he's identified that a positive to a negative interaction is not one to one. You need five positive. I was gonna do this. 5 positive interactions to offset one negative interaction, and he called that the emotional bank account, right? So you need 5 deposits for every one withdrawal. I then talk about Chapman's love languages. So we have words of affirmation, acts of service, gift giving or receiving, quality time, and touch. I say that those are the deposits that we use. We use the IAP as the currency exchange. So I even have a currency exchange worksheet in the book. And I recently did this with this clients in session, which is what? Define for me what is your or one partner's definition of the love languages. So for one partner, quality time meant going out, going on a date. For the other partner, quality time meant staying home, watching TV. For one partner, words of affirmation meant say that I love you every day. For the other partner, it meant encouragement, right? So even their acts of service were different. So when I just talk about love language, oh, my love language is quality time, but I don't go insofar as to define or see if our quality time means the same thing. My deposit may not be landing in your emotional bank account. Does that make sense?
Yes, because I'm familiar with the five love languages, and like for mine, it would be words of affirmation, quality time, where my partner's is receiving gifts, right? Is act services, but she likes words of affirmation as well. But to your point, and I'm glad that you give that example because I look for encouragement, right? You've done something well, thank you for being able to do this for me. But when I trace it back and I figure it out, it's because growing up I didn't hear that.
Yeah.
So that's where I found out, right? Whereas receiving gifts was something that was used to cover up maybe insecurities or shortcomings of the family unit. So I grew to not like it because I always associated it with something bad instead of something good. So as you
Yeah,
pointed out, right, if we don't define it, we may put ourselves in a situation where we don't communicate properly to our partner that we want to receive it and how to receive it. And if we don't speak up, they may be doing something that they think is so amazing, and to us it's kind of like blah, right?
yeah. And it becomes a withdrawal even. I had this couple, this was a while back, that the the husband went through great lengths to get this like purse for her birthday. And it was, like identifying the style she wanted. So it's like he went through this because to him, gift giving is his way of showing love. Gift receiving is not her way of receiving love, right? What she wanted was words of affirmation and quality time. So when she received the gift, he imagined that it would be a lump sum deposit in their emotional bank account. But the currency exchange didn't translate. And so when she got it, she's like, oh, it's so beautiful, and put it to the side. And then it became a withdrawal for him because he has certain expectations of what her reaction would be. Yeah.
So is that then the responsibility of the person who is doing the act, or the responsibility of the person receiving it, or maybe a little bit of column A and a little bit of column B?
I think it's both. I think as us getting to know one another, right? Like, so you can only know the deposits that land for me if I am able to tell you them. And I can only know the deposits that land for you if you tell me that, right? So if we're able to express to one another our likes and dislikes, what I need from you to give you what you need. I love using that question, especially for boundary purposes, right? What I need from you to give you what you need. Um, how do you want to be loved, right? So how can I love you in a way that you want to be loved? And how can you love me in a way that I want to be loved? It's kind of, let's go back to gift giving. Am I giving a gift that I know you want, or am I giving the gift that I want to give you?
That's a question I had to learn to ask myself early on, because I would see something and it would remind me of the person. Back when I
Mm-hmm.
used to give gifts, right? I had to relearn how to give it because for my past couple of relationships, even though it was something that I wouldn't receive, they wanted it, right? So I had to learn that very early on. So what I did was I would start to ask questions and pick up on clues. But to your point, right? Like sometimes we see something, we're like, oh, okay, I think she's going to look good in this, but does she think she's going to look good in it? Right? And I think that's
Yeah,
the power of communication, because how many of us ask the question that way? What do you think?
yeah. I really appreciate that. There are people that like they like to go through the process of gift giving and surprising the other, and I think there's nothing wrong with that. Like being thought of is really nice. I do think that there's the expectation, right? When we, if part of our love language is gift giving, part of the gift giving is the reaction of the person receiving it. If the person whom I'm giving a gift to is not a gift receiver, if I'm not aware of that, I'm going to be disappointed every time. If I'm aware of that, then I know that it's about me giving you the gift more than you receiving it. Because that's how I receive love, by giving that gift. Does that make sense?
Yes, because now I'm imagining someone, they've worked hard, right? A lot of us work hard for our money. They go out and they get something, and then it doesn't meet the expectations that they have set for the gift to be received. You do that once, you get a little disappointed in yourself because the person didn't react the way you wanted to. And then instead of communicating that, you just try again, right? Act of insanity, doing the same thing over and over, expecting different result.
Expecting
You try a
difference.
second
Yeah.
time, right? Now you're frustrated. You're like, why doesn't he like my gift? You're like, okay, I'm going to try one more time. Same thing. You try one more time. And now everyone is annoyed because this person as in their own way, right? They kind of give you subtle clues. Maybe something else, right? Where you're as on the other end, you're like, why doesn't he like my gift? Now you have
Mhm.
frustration, right? Do you see that then maybe creating a wedge between the two people in their relationship if that were to happen?
It can if we don't listen to one another, right? Sometimes I'm so worried, so frustrated about one, not feeling heard, and two, I didn't do what you're accusing me of. They were so focused on the me that we're not listening to what our partner is saying. Um, One of the things that I talk about in the book, which is not an IAP thing, is just a general couples therapy, is reflecting, right? And the science of reflecting is repeating back to you what you said and what I understood from what you said, and then giving you the opportunity to tell me whether I need to be corrected or not. And when we reflect, it requires for us to listen. Because a lot of the times, when the other person is talking, I am not listening because I am thinking about my argument and how to defend myself. Right. So, one of the things that we can use is reflecting because we both, or more than one, want to be heard. And if we're not feeling heard, we're likely also not listening.
But just like how there's different ways to show someone love, right? There's five that we're talking about right now. There's different ways to communicate your
Mm-hmm.
approval of something, your disapproval of something. So, what if someone's way of communication is not necessarily words, but it's their responses, their facial expressions, their body language? How do we then pursue in that situation?
So that takes me to my husband and I grew up communicating differently, meaning that I am a more direct person, right? He is more diplomatic, let me put it that way. And even the concept of the word respect, right? So the way that I see respect is to say, if you ask me a question, I will answer you directly, right? So if you cook something for me and you ask, did you like it? And I didn't, I'll say, I appreciate it. Is not really my taste. I don't really, this is actually me being a little bit more diplomatic because before I would just say, no, I don't like it, but thank you. Or I don't like it, but right. To me, that is respectful because I'm saying the truth, my truth, right? The word truth, like, it's very subjective. My husband learned more that being respectful is, you know, I really appreciate you. Thank you so much. This is delicious, right? Because I don't want to hurt your feelings. This is something so minute, it's not like a big deal. So he would, the way that he learned, that would be respectful. My way has actually been received as disrespect, right? So our vision, culturally speaking, when you're talking about mannerisms, culturally speaking, it can be very different. So our definition of how we communicate becomes important, right? As you're saying, like somebody who I have a client or me, you can see that I'm like, my hands are everywhere. I have a client that he says, like, I speak with my hands, and people think that I'm being aggressive, and I'm not. I'm just because I speak with my hands and I do this, they think that I'm combative or animated or like, and it's not. Is I'm impassioned. And so it requires us knowing the other person. How well do I know the other individual to know how they are taking something or whether I'm taking what they are doing or saying in the correct way.
There's someone who she uses when something bothers her, she'll make like a light joke about it, right? So let's say, for example, to your point, right? Oh, you made this meal for me, ha ha ha. I feel like I'm a queen, but I didn't really enjoy it. Like she'll make a joke about it, and then the next day she'll mention it again. She'll make a light joke about it. So that's how she tries to communicate that something's bothering her because she doesn't want to come across like it's fully bothering her, but she'll mention it and then she'll kind of like laugh about it, but she'll always talk about it. And that's how I had to learn. That's how she would communicate. Because if something doesn't really bother her, she'll just say something along the lines is, well, you're late today, but it's not a big deal. You know, I had to change a couple of plans and that's it. You know that it bothered her, but she kind of soothed herself. She resolved it herself. If it's something that still bothers her, she'll mention it and like make a joke about it day after day after day without ever coming out and saying that, Terrain, this bothers me. Versus me now, if something bothers me, I'll say that, hey, do you have a moment? We'll talk. And I say, okay, this is the issue. I didn't appreciate this because of this. Right. And to your point, a lot of people are like, and you would think that you attacked them physically, right?
Yeah.
But they take it as an attack. And then sometimes I look back and I'm like, okay, the only people that I know that communicate this way consistently are people who work on the different forms of communication. So I'm wondering, is it because our experiences in the field and with other people, or is it maybe something that we're just better than a lot of people at and we've learned like so many others? What do you think?
I think that again, I'll go back to the concept of culture, right? And culture is not just in relationship to uh, religion, nationality, and race, but also the culture of the household. Where if I look at you a certain way, you know what the look means. Like my husband, I feel like sometimes he knows me better than I know myself. Just in how I breathe, he will know if I'm okay or I'm not, and vice versa, right? But that's just because we've gotten to know each other so well. But I do think that there are meanings associated to certain mannerisms, certain things that we do, that if we are in that household or within that culture, we all know the meaning associated to that. And we don't tend to talk about, I think, openly speaking about what is going on with us, our frustrations, or it's something new, right? Before we used to just put everything under the rug. We would use passive aggressiveness as a way to try to get you to understand why is it that I'm feeling this way without actually telling you, because just telling you, it could be fear, it could be maybe I'm being rude, I'm being vulnerable, or it's just uncomfortable and I don't know how to say it, right? So I rather not say anything.
That's
But
what I
I
wonder
think,
too,
yeah,
because to your point, right? Like the communication, anytime it's like if you were to go in front of an audience and give a talk or a speech, or you're working with clients, right? Like your communication, I think a lot of people forget has to fit your audience,
yeah.
right? Could that be that maybe that's the missing piece? Whereas you have to communicate in a way that the receiver of the message understands this, not necessarily in the way that you think it should be received.
Yeah, it's whose burden is it, right? And different cultures will say different way. Whose burden of is it to be clear? The person giving the message or the person receiving the message? I believe that, well, yes, a little bit of both. I do think that it is a higher burden on me when I'm communicating to be as clear as I can. And sometimes what I think is clear may not be clear to the person who's receiving it. So I also think that for the receiver, coming from a place of curiosity becomes important. You notice that I've repeated this question many times. Did that make sense? Right? That's my way of trying to identify, like, did what I say and what you hear, were they like the same thing? Or did it get lost in translation? That's my way of trying to figure it out. But from you, you can also say, I don't know, did I understand that correctly? So I think the burden is a little bit of both. Um, some people believe it's only on one side, some people believe it's only on the other.
And that's a tough place to be in because I'm trying to remember a time where I didn't do this and I wasn't so inquisitive about it, where I was just communicating, let's say, in the way that I was taught. Whereas you try to be as nice as possible and you're very careful with your words. But then as I got older, I began to realize that that wasn't the best way to do things because a lot of times, if you're so concerned about offending someone, you may not truly want to say what you're going to say,
Yes.
right?
Um, That's when I like using the three columns of communication. So we'll go into some of the strategies, right? I have strategies for those giving the message and those receiving the message. Um, I've used it a lot and I really appreciate it. So the three columns of communication is column one is venting. Don't vent to the intended person. In your venting, we are not intentional about the words that we use. In our venting, we go on tangents. In our venting, we swim in a sea of unfortunate word choices. So, and when you're venting, use like externalization coping strategies. Either just say it out loud. I like doing it in the shower because you're feeling the water soothing you. Write it. Sometimes I'll write it down so I can process it a little bit better. Some people like to audio record themselves or video record. Any way that you can do it, as long as it's not just internal, it's external somehow. Like our senses act as fact checkers, right? I like to say when life gives you stresses, use one of your five senses. So after you go through the venting process, then we have the identifying the message you want the intended person to receive. There's a difference between what I want to tell you and the message I want you to receive, right? So I have questions that I guide you in, like, what's the purpose of this message? What are your expectations in response? Once you identify the message, then you go to what you were talking about, knowing your audience. What is the best delivery method for that individual? Is it one, the actual method of like verbal, written, um, two, using analogies? And if I don't have one, then we fall into the I statement formula, right? And I go through the do's and don'ts of the I statement because people use it erroneously quite often. Usa.
The I
I
statement is so dangerous, but talk about it, please.
okay. So have I do I have my do's and don'ts memorized? When you are going through the actually, I'm just gonna read what I wrote because it makes life a little bit easier. Give me a moment. So three columns of communication, which is the first thing that I'm talking about. Aha, okay. I am, for those who may have the book, I'm on page 33. So for you to use the I statement successfully, the first part of the I statement is like the I feel. So you're talking about the emotion that you felt caused by a specific situation and then what you would like in return. So things to avoid, accusations. The reason that we say the word I as opposed to you is the moment that I tell you that you did something, our inherent response is to guard up and to think about either what, no, I didn't do what you're telling me that I did. Or if I cannot think about that, I'll think about, well, you also did, but I'm not listening to you. Right. So there's a difference between you are always late, you never help, versus saying I get irritated when there's tardiness or when I feel like I'm doing things on my own. So accusatory language, you hurt me, I statement formula, I feel hurt. An easy way to cheat, step one, is using the word like or that after I feel. I feel like you hurt me. I feel like you don't listen to me. I feel that you don't do enough. The correct is I feel hurt. I feel silenced. I feel exhausted. No likes, no that's. Um, Use passive as opposed to active language as a way to avoid using the you in an accusatory tone. So an active language would be, you hurt me because you left me waiting outside for an hour. Passive language, I felt hurt when I was left waiting outside for an hour. Another example of active language, you don't listen to me. Passive, I don't feel heard. Let me see, what else do I have here for you? Try using we as opposed to you. We feels inclusive, you feels distancing. So distancing would be, why are you starting a fight with me? Inclusive, why are we fighting? Distancing, you can do better. Inclusive, we can do better. Right? We're in this together. Don't use generalizations. Always, you always do this, because the moment you tell me you always do this, you never do that, I'm thinking about the time, even if it's just 1%, when you're wrong. And again, I am not listening to you. Even if 99% of the time I've done it, the 1% is going to save me and I'm going to hold on to that. Right? So try to avoid generalizations. And then don't set unrealistic expectations. If I'm expressing to you that I really dislike tardiness, you can just be on time next time. I could instead say, what could we do so next time we can be on time? Could we maybe set an alarm? Would this, I think, is a place where you could put the word you. Would you prefer that we set this for later? Right? But now we're having a negotiation. We are having more realistic expectations. Sorry, I'm done.
Bravo. That was amazing. It got me in a very reflective state. I was thinking of something that bothered me because the person I'm with is always tired. She works a lot. She's a nurse. She's
Okay.
always tired. And what happened is we're supposed to meet up somewhere, and because she was always tired, she was late. And it bothered me just because I know that it was a long it was the travel time was longer for me, so therefore I had to wake up earlier. And I woke up pretty early just so I can meet it. Whereas she got to sleep during that time, and even though it was um a shorter travel time for her, because she overslept, I was there at one time and then she was like 2 hours later. So when you mentioned it, I sat back and I thought about it. I was like, I'm glad that I didn't make a big deal about it because it wasn't that big of a deal. It was more of an annoyance given the circumstances of when I had to wake up and then she got to enjoy her sleep, right? And then when I look back in my mind, I was thinking but it's like I feel disappointed because of what you did. I feel like this because of you, right? But what came out of my mouth was just that we had something planned, and because of the difference in time now, we can't do this.
Yeah.
Right. So are you saying that that was the better course of action to take versus me saying that, oh, because you were late, I can't do this?
And let me tell you, this takes practice, right? The concept of the I statement, I say it the way that I envision, because I'm a very visual person. I'm not an auditory learner. I'm visual, I'm kinesthetic. And um, I envision it as if it were a filter, right? You know the little funnels when like you're putting something like, I don't know, coarse salt in a little salt shaker. So you're like the funnel. That's my vision. You have a bunch of you, and then when it comes down, it has to come into an I feel, right? So it requires active practice, right? For me to be able to communicate differently, I need to practice this different communication. And it comes out a little bit softer than the you. The you seems very strong, seems very heavy, versus when you express like, I feel frustrated about this behavior or about this instance. And I think it is fair for somebody to be frustrated about a situation while not necessarily being angry at me. So I, when you talked about this, I thought of this example of, I traveled with a friend of mine. This was our first time traveling together. And before leaving, she wanted to do something, but I wasn't like, I didn't necessarily understand that she wanted to do that thing. So I took my time packing, showering. I'm like, oh, we have enough time. And then she was flustered and frustrated because we didn't get to do the thing that she wanted to do. And I could see her energy in the car. And I said to her, like, you get to be frustrated with the situation and even with me, but not be angry at me right now, which to her was like, holy crap, yes, I get to do that. Right? We have the right to be, and in this example that you gave, you have the right to be frustrated because you were there waiting. We don't know what was happening on her side, so she may also have been flustered and frustrated. We just know what's happening with us, right? But it's so giving the other person the room to feel the way that they are feeling becomes important.
I wonder then, to the person who is feeling what they're feeling, because as you mentioned, we're all entitled to our emotions in a healthy way, right? There's a destructive side. Those who were entitled to feel what we feel, then when it comes to the resolution of the situation, is that something that comes from one person, or is that something that comes from the both of the people involved in it?
I think it depends on the situation. I think that during an argument, during a fight, during a crisis, we don't have as much control of things, right? Of our faculty, of our emotions, or whatever we're going through. So it's giving grace to knowing that we're going to have the debriefing session or conversation. Um, and in that debriefing conversation, to be able to understand the process and not be so focused on the content, right? In mental health, we talk a lot about content and process. So for those who are listening to us, right, when we're talking about content are the details of the situation. Process is how we're dealing with it, right? How you are impacted by it. Sometimes we are very stuck in the content and we cannot move past it to be able to process it. So I'm so focused on saying what you did as opposed to what I would like next time or how I felt about the deed itself. So when we have the post conversation is being able to focus on, okay, this happened. What have we learned from this situation? Should it happen again, we can do it differently. So I really disliked that you didn't call me, right? What was it for you? What would you have liked from me? So what I need from you to give you what you need is if you call me to tell me that you're going to be late, I'll be frustrated, but I being on the no makes me feel better. Does that make sense? That's my
Yes,
question about
because yeah,
that.
yes, because then you're able to, as you mentioned, depending on the situation, but probably in most situations, you can resolve it. You can resolve what you're feeling on your own, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Versus turning to that person to resolve it for you. Then is what you're saying, then, just so I understand, that it is better to focus on what has happened, the action, more so than the person doing it?
No, I think I want to try to go beyond the action and try to understand or be curious about the intention, right? I want us to be able to, instead of focusing because the action may not have been successful, but what was the person's intention behind it? If we can move past that, that gets us to a better place. If the intention was maleficent, then then I interpreted it correctly and you were trying to be, you know, mischievous. I don't know. But if the intention wasn't, but I became hurt by the action, if I'm able to see beyond that and understand what the other person's point of view was or their reasoning for doing this, it can be more forgiving because now we're like, okay, so next time, what I would actually need from you is A, B, C, and D.
Then how does someone then identify the difference between action, maybe a one-off, and the intention, and then maybe if it becomes habitual over and over again?
That is funny because I had a conversation with a friend of mine about that when we were talking about apologies, right? And I said there's a great book, I think I mentioned this last time, Your Apology Sucks by Dr. John Debacci and his wife, Dr. Michelle Debacci. Definitely worth the read. But the concept of an apology is there are people who say I don't believe in that word anymore because there are empty apologies when I say I'm sorry for something but I continue doing the same thing. I think that an apology is if I tell you, like, I'm sorry this happened, I'm going to try to do better, and I need an adjustment period, right? Sometimes we're so used to doing something one way that we need to have that adjustment period to implement the change that we're trying to implement. Um, but I really dislike utilizing actions speak louder than words when I don't know what your action is telling me. But if I'm telling you I'm going to do different, but I continue to do the same, now your actions are speaking louder than words because you're just talking, but you're not walking the walk. Does that make sense?
Yes, because it reminds me of something where I read where there's like these different how to properly apologize. And maybe it discusses it in that book, which I've just added to my reading list, by the way. And then one of them is basically, if I remember correctly, it's acknowledging the offense, like what has happened, accepting responsibility, and then expressing your regret, and then what you're going to do afterwards. And then you ask for forgiveness. I think the middle stages where people forget is they forget to tell the person what they're going to do to help ensure that doesn't happen again. Right? It's
Yeah.
easy to say that I'm sorry, can you forgive me? And then that's it, right? And to your point, actions speak louder words. Then all of a sudden now they're on a straight arrow. That may last a month, 2 months.
Is that consistency, right? Is when it's, think of a diet. When we go on a temporary diet, we'll lose the weight temporarily, but then we go back to eating how we ate before or having the lifestyle we had before. Our body's going to go back to what was before. Whenever we want to either lose or gain weight, our diet is stricter. But once we identify we like this weight or where we are at, then we identify what is the sustainable diet for my lifestyle. It's not temporary. It's the same thing when we're talking about these changes. It's that consistency, something that is sustainable because it is going to be a lifestyle change, is not temporary.
Yeah, that makes complete sense because you want to make sure that it's long lasting and it's not something that was just said in the moment because no one likes a
Yeah.
stressful moment, right? Especially in the household. So there's like, okay, you know what? I'm sorry, and then I'll go from there. So as we close, maybe Patricia, what are maybe some ways that we can better communicate not only what we discuss, but let's say better communicate the apology aspect of it?
Okay. Um, I'd say it's really important to give the benefit of the doubt, right? If the person is deserving of it, like if this is a repetitive thing, we need to be aware that like this is a repetitive issue. You might not be the person for me if we don't connect. I get that. However, if most of the times the individual who did the offense is great 90% of the time, but messed up, and it's a like apologizing, like, can I give that person before even an apology, can I give them the benefit of the doubt? So this is from the person receiving. Are there other ways in which I can take or interpret the same behavior? For the person who is wanting to apologize, is identify what am I apologizing for. I think acknowledgement is such an important aspect of any apology. It's understanding um, how this could have offended you, and I did not, what my intention was. Because it could be that it got lost in translation and it was not my intention at all, and I didn't even foresee how it could have been interpreted that way. So I like, for me the behavior and apology just makes no sense. But now that I understand how it was hurtful to you, I get to apologize for hurting you, knowing that was not my intention. Does that make sense?
It does. And I think that's a perfect way to end it because you always want to make sure that the intention is important because many times I would say, if I look at what I've experienced, it wasn't maliciously done. Many times they just didn't know how it would land, or maybe they didn't know, maybe so they're so used to saying it that way that it's just become custom. Like you and I, from what we shared today, we're pretty direct people, but sometimes that can rub people the wrong way.
Yeah. And I like to be able to say, like, the way that I received this was like this. And that's why it caused offense. And so the other person gets to say, this was not my intention at all, or well, that's exactly what I meant to do.